Have you ever asked yourself, did I sound weak? Did I sound vulnerable? Well, most people, when they ask these sorts of questions, their answers have always described what their voices sounded like. But what actually matters is what their voices said. After all, according to ancient philosophers, they stated that language carries the essence of our personality, thus our feelings. I'm Omar Muhammad. I study linguistics and translation. And today, hopefully, I'm going to show you that language tells more or shows more about you than you ever care to admit. So, in order for me to showcase how language portrays mental states, thoughts, and feelings, one must first has to understand how to analyze language. Though the methods of analyzing language might differ, the one I found most favorable to me is stylistics. Now, what is stylistics? Stylistics is a branch of applied linguistics concerned with the study of style in texts, especially in literary works, also called literary linguistics. Stylistics focuses on the figures, tropes, and other rhetorical devices used to provide variety and distinctness to someone's writing. It is linguistic analysis plus literary criticism. Now, according to Wales, most stylistics is not simply to describe the formal features of texts for their own sake, but in order to show their functional significance for the interpretation of the text, or in order to relate literary effects to linguistic causes where these are felt to be relevant. Now, stylistics itself is not actually a method. It's an overgeneralized term that contains lots and lots of theories, with each having their own uses. One of which is a phonological level analysis, or an analysis of a lexical one or a grammatical one. The one we're using is called transitivity. It's a functional analysis of narrative. Part of the ideational function, which concerns with the transmission of ideas, is transitivity. Its function is that of representing processes or experiences like actions, events, processes of consciousness, and relations that covers all phenomena and anything that can be expressed by a verb. Event, whether physical or not, state, or relations. Now, Halliday furthers that explanation, stating that the processes we use in language represent our conception of the world, thus relating in a way to the psychological mental state of a person. Now, transitivity further specifies the processes we use, the types of processes, forming a model that divides a sentence, dividing them into processes, participant roles, and circumstances. Now, the processes of transitivity are divided into 6 types: material, existential, relational, verbal, mental, and behavioral, with each having their designated participant roles. For instance, material processes have an agent, which is the doer of an action, or the doer of the process. Then we have the material process, and eventually the goal. Now, if we try to analyze a character's development in a piece of literature as transitivity as a tool, one must first has to look for the participant role in which the character resides. If the participant role the character resides is a doer of an action, the sayer of a verbiage, we get a sense of powerfulness. On the other hand, if he is the medium, the one who is being done to, we get a sense of powerlessness. So, now that we have an understanding, a working understanding of transitivity, how about we use it? The Matrix. It's the year 1999. Our protagonist, Mr. Anderson, who goes by the hacker alias Neo, works in a cubicle, manning a computer and doing a little hacking on the side. It's through this latter activity that Mr. Anderson makes the acquaintance of Morpheus, who has some interesting news for Mr. Anderson. None of what's going on around him is real.
The year is actually closer to 2199. Though the news might be shocking to any human being, it's our job to analyze Mr. Anderson's mental state or the shift in his mental state throughout the movie.
In my paper, I divided the analysis into three parts. First, blind obedience, then confusion, and eventually insight.
So, let's start with blind obedience. Blind obedience, according to psychology, is a trait that is best shown in being the one who's told imperative clauses, orders, and straightforward statements. Let's have a sample.
You have a problem with authority, Mr. Anderson. You believe that you are special, that somehow the rules do not apply to you. Obviously, you are mistaken.
In this scene, we see the employer giving direct statements about Mr. Anderson, while Mr. Anderson himself doesn't have a say in it. Now let's do a processes analysis. The sentence, "You are mistaken." You here referring to Mr. Anderson, while filling the participant role of the carrier of a relational process, while are is the relational process, and mistaken is the attribute which is given to Mr. Anderson, the carrier. Although the relational process itself doesn't really show any mental state of Mr. Anderson, the fact that the whole conversation or the whole scene is a verbiage that is being told to Mr. Anderson himself says a lot. Okay, let's see another scene.
Whatever you think you know about this man is irrelevant.
In this scene, yet another statement about Mr. Anderson himself is directed towards him, but this time from an interrogator. Here we have another relational process. While the first clause, the whole first clause itself being a carrier, whatever you think you know about this man, referring to Mr. Anderson's knowledge, while is the relational process, and irrelevant is another attribute. Though this scene or this sentence itself doesn't really show a state of powerfulness for Mr. Anderson by the fact that his knowledge is the carrier, but the fact that irrelevant being the attribute.
Now we've reached the end of the first part, though the second part would prove to be the more vital one, for it shows the journey one takes to reach insight.
Confusion. In the field of psychology, the state of confusion is described as a state of disorientation, an inability to think clearly, and a difficulty in making decisions. A state where logic becomes both a rare find and a necessity to be sought. Though confusion and blind obedience might have a lot of similarities in clauses, types, and processes, the only difference is the character himself becomes the sayer of the verbiage, not the one who's being said to. Let's see a couple of samples. When confusion became apparent on Neo or Mr. Anderson was when Morpheus told him the truth about the Matrix, that it's not real and reality is the future.
This isn't real.
This is not real. Yet another relational process just like the ones we had in blind obedience, but this one we have Neo as the one who's saying it, the sayer himself. This here being the carrier is not being the relational process, and real is the attribute. Now let's see another one. Though Neo's denial might be a state in itself, it still supports confusion.
I don't believe it. It's not possible.
Here we have a continuation of the past scene where Neo's denial goes farther. Though in this one we are introduced to another process. The mental process. I don't believe this. I here referring to Neo while filling the participant role of the censor, while don't believe is the cognitive mental process, and this is the phenomenon. And we see yet another relational process. This is impossible, while this, the future, which Neo is in denial of, is the carrier, and is the relational process, and impossible is the attribute. Though the pure state of confusion or the pure state of uncertainty is shown when he meets the oracle. Let's see a couple of scenes from that encounter.
You're the Oracle?
You are the oracle. You here, referring to the oracle herself, while filling the participant role of the identified, R is the relational process, and the oracle is the identifier. Though the whole sentence itself is a verbiage, a sentence or a question that is given by Neo to the oracle, showing his uncertainty. Though the next scene is actually the most significant one, showing once and for all Mr. Anderson's uncertainty and cluelessness.
Honestly, I don't know.
I don't know. A sentence that is always used in the absence of logic. I, being the censor, don't know, being the mental process.
Now, as the movie progresses, we see Neo going past denial while reaching insight, accepting the reality of the future.
Insight is a state that is always mistaken for all-knowing, although it couldn't be farther from the truth. It is the state in which a character looks at the world in diamond eyes. Eyes that see the world in the form of constants, causality, action and reaction, cause and effect. Although diamond eyes can't be perceived, it can only be seen in one's language, choice of words that show resolve. Though insight being the shortest part of the movie, it only exists in two scenes, one of which is a simple no.
No.
No here being the verbiage, a verbiage of a verbal process, showing Neo's first forms of acceptance of this reality. While the final scene is the true indication of insight and powerfulness.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
In this scene, we've seen 4 different types of processes and got introduced into 2, material and the verbal. Though Neo uses 2 mental processes, showing his final mental state and resolve, while him being the censor of each one. Then we finally got introduced to the material process. I came to tell you. I here referring to Neo as he filled the role of the actor, came the material process to tell you is the goal. In this scene we've seen 2 other material processes, with Neo filling the participant role of the agent. The first one was, I'm gonna show these people. The second one was, I leave to you. The final process we got introduced to was the verbal process. I came to tell you how this is going to begin. I being Neo as the sayer, tell is the verbal process, you is the receiver, while the rest of the sentence is the verbiage.
Finally, we've reached the end of our analysis using the transitivity tool to analyze or to showcase Neo's development or mental state from blind obedience to confusion and finally to insight. I hope I've helped you reach a better understanding of transitivity and stylistics. So, thank you for watching.